Tonight, hundreds of arrests and tents erected on the lawns of America's most prestigious universities as protests sweep across the country. The American campus is now the new battleground for free speech. In Atlanta, police fired rubber bullets and made several arrests. As tensions rise, the Israeli Prime Minister has described the action as horrific and called for them to stop. Tonight, we look back at the long legacy of student activism and how it's helped to change government policy. We'll hear both sides of the debate and see how the protest is spreading outside America's borders. Also tonight, the ultimate betrayal. Victims of Harvey Weinstein react after one of his rape convictions was overturned on appeal.
This today is an act of institutional betrayal. And our institutions betray survivors of male sexual violence.
We'll also hear from Palestinians who say they've been mistreated by Israel's ultra-Orthodox battalion as the US prepares to withdraw funding. And I'll speak live to a man on hunger strike in Tenerife as the backlash against over-tourism grows. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We start the program tonight where we ended last night. On campus in the United States, as unrest sweeps through some of the country's top universities. They've been at the center of intense debate since the attack by Hamas on October the 7th and Israel's devastating military response. And as encampments sprung up on campus lawns, this has been the response. Dozens of officers in riot gear, some on horseback, making more than 400 arrests across the country. In Atlanta, for example, police were accused today of using rubber bullets, tear gas and tasers as they detained students and teachers. It's a divisive debate, with Jewish students arguing university leaders are enabling intimidation and hate speech, while demonstrators say they have a right to be vocal about the war in Gaza. We'll hear from both sides in a moment, but we begin with a report from our US correspondent Martha Kellner in Los Angeles.
We have the freedom of speech to do this, just like they have the freedom to do
but
that.
this is provoking. It's bad. It's bad for you. It's just reactionary.
I'm here to show Jewish students that we do not need to be afraid.
Help them.
On American campuses, passions are raw, divisions deep.
The kids are getting killed.
By Hamas terrorists.
By Hamas terrorists, by Netanyahu and Biden. Jeez.
The majority of the Jewish students that I asked to come out and help me declined out of fear. Fear in the sense that they might get physically attacked, fear that a TA or professor might see them and discriminate them in class. Saying pro-Palestine, saying free Palestine, I understand that. That is freedom of speech, there's nothing wrong with that. But saying such as intifada, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that is not a peaceful, that is an act of hate, and that is a call for hatred against the Jewish people, a call for extermination of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. That is not peaceful protesting.
Tents erected this time at UCLA. 7,000 miles from the war in Gaza, but the tension here feels close. Pro-Palestinian protests are moving fast across this country.
Get back! Get back!
Evidence here of just how quickly they can turn ugly. The police have issued a dispersal order on the USC campus. They've warned students that if they remain here, they will be arrested. A reminder, as these protests grow in size and number, that they have the potential to become ever more volatile. Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West. A place of education turned into a centre for confrontation. They've been told by the police to leave, but a hardcore remain. And you're prepared to be arrested? Why do you feel so passionately about being here, even though the police are telling you to leave?
Because we know that we're on the right side of this right now, and if we're not going to do it, who is?
Are you scared?
No. I think that the children in Gaza are more scared than I am.
On their arms, they scribble the number of a helpline to call from prison. One by one, they're cuffed and carted off. dozens in total, and many more across this country. Their peers chant in support. Students here say they have two core aims. A demand that their university cuts all financial ties with Israel and that their country stops sending them weapons.
The light may be fading here, but the intensity of feeling certainly isn't. The police working out just how to break up these protests.
They conclude it's with more force. An hours-long standoff brought to an end like this. But they know it will likely bubble up again. A campus and a country braced for more unrest.
And Martha joins me now live from UCLA. And Martha, I mean, you were at USC last night, you're at UCLA today. What happened yesterday doesn't seem to have deterred these students at UCLA, you know, despite the arrest, despite everything they're seeing. Emotions are just so high and they continue to remain defiant and protest.
That's exactly right, Yalda. Chaos now on campuses across America. This protest movement, which began a week ago at Columbia University in New York, has spread to the north, south and west of this country. Now more than a dozen universities are in a state of protest, more than 400 arrests in the past week. As you saw there, I was at the University of Southern California last night. Almost 100 arrests made there, some of them peaceful arrests of protesters who just refused to leave that space. Some of them got into skirmishes with police. So there is really the sense that these protests could spill over into violent and certainly volatile incidents. I'm now just 10 miles up the road from the University of Southern California here at UCLA, and this tent encampment was erected around 4 a.m. this morning. They're not allowed to be here, but as of yet the police haven't moved in to tell them to dismantle these tents, although they have had calls with the fire department about safety. As you can see, they are pro-Palestinian students and some people from off campus as well. Not everyone here is a student. Like the rest of the students involved in these protests, they say their aims are twofold: to make a point about the loss of civilian life in Gaza, but also to try and make demands of their own universities to divest, to cut financial ties with Israeli companies. I'm not sure whether you can make out just this sign behind me, one of the signs calling for intifada. So clearly some inflammatory statements being made here, as well as the more reasonable calls for a ceasefire and to free Palestine. But speaking to the organisers here, they say that they're not going anywhere.
And I mean, Martha, I don't know if we can still hear you. As you say, I mean, these young students are being accused of trespassing because, you know, that is ultimately what the universities are saying, that they're not allowed to be erecting these tent cities. Just tell us about what's happened in Atlanta, because there are reports, accusations that police used rubber bullets, for example, and tear gas.
Yeah, and I think just firstly, when you were talking about, you know, they're being told that they're trespassing, there's also a serious point here about how these encampments make Jewish students feel, and, you know, whether they feel unsafe on campus. And certainly speaking to a few Jewish students who have been walking past this encampment, they said exactly that they feel isolated and threatened at their own university. But as for Atlanta, at Emory University, there it's a campus that's usually very serene, very quiet. But this morning, the scene of skirmishes with police. Officers seen there wrestling with protesters on the ground, escorting others away, making a number of arrests. We don't quite know the exact number of arrests at Emory University, but demonstrators there are accusing the police of using pepper spray or tear gas to break up those protests. The university not commenting on those specific claims of the use of tear gas. I saw yesterday evening the police at the University of Southern California, they were prepared to use tear gas. They had tear gas canisters, although they weren't dispensed last night. No tear gas was used there. A spokesman for the university, the Emory University in Atlanta, said protesters were activists attempting to disrupt our university as our students finish classes and prepare for finals. So clearly short shrift being taken by university administrators at Emory University. And here in California, USC administrators say they are now cancelling the university graduation ceremony, which was scheduled for next month in light of these protests, they say, to protect student safety.
Okay, Martha, thank you so much for all of your reporting. And as Martha was saying there are Jewish students and Jewish student body groups who say they feel intimidated by these encampments and are very concerned. And one of those students is Lishi Baker, a Jewish student at Columbia University. Lishi, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Just tell us what you've been thinking, feeling as these demonstrations have gained momentum.
I mean, look, we've been calling this out for months. We've been saying that this rhetoric, calling for intifada, saying death to the Zionist state, saying we don't want no Zionists here. We've been saying that this is threatening and harmful for months now, and nobody has taken us seriously. And at Columbia, we've seen what happens when you don't take us seriously. It's now turned to violence. I have friends who've been harassed and assaulted inside the gates. They're sneaking people in and out with masks, and we have no idea who they are. So at this point, it's escalated from rhetoric to actual harassment and assault on campus.
Lishi, I spoke to one of your fellow students just a couple of nights ago. She was arrested. She said she was protesting peacefully, that she hadn't herself personally heard any kind of anti-Semitic slogans, and that their main aim was an end to the conflict, the war in Gaza. How would you respond?
I mean, in my opinion, if your main aim is an end to the conflict in Gaza or better futures for Israelis and Palestinians alike, I mean, most of us have that same aim. Let's have pragmatic conversations about it. But when you join with a movement that's calling for death to the Zionist state, and you join with a movement that's trafficking violence, it's really hard to be able to differentiate between the people that might actually want to have pragmatic conversations and the larger movement, which is trafficking anti-Semitism.
And one of the pushbacks when I put that to her is that she said there are potential agitators, masked people who are outside the university saying these sorts of things, and it wasn't the bulk of the student movement. In fact, I want to quote a PhD student, Jonathan Ben Mesha-Chem, who says that, he's had to sort of speak to his family who are worried about the situation on campus in Columbia, and he says that, many Jewish students are part of these protests at Columbia University, and they are, not sort of feeling threatened in any way, but that's not how you feel.
I mean, look, I think there's two parts of that question. One is the relationship with people who are not affiliated with the university. And my answer to that is that when you wear masks, we don't know who's who. And there's been a total lack of enforcement on the part of public safety in order to differentiate who has an ID and who doesn't have an ID. And we know that the students inside the encampment are working with the groups outside to sneak people in. We have that on video. We see people wearing the same outfits and the same logos on their hats and on their clothing. In terms of the Jewish students that are a part of it, it is really sad to me because I think that some of them probably don't understand Zionism and the inextricable link between the Jewish people and the state of Israel. And others have been using their Jewish identities, exploiting their Jewish identities to say, well, we are Jews here and there are Jews here, so therefore there can't be any anti-Semitism. And to me, that's absurd. What other minority group could you say, oh, there's a member of this minority group here, so therefore there's no way we could be discriminating? That is a crazy double standard that Jews are being held to.
Lishi, I also, saw some images today of an unarmed middle-aged female philosophy professor who was being arrested. And, some of these students who've been arrested say that they were peacefully protesting. How do you feel when you see fellow students being arrested or police being called on campus by, the faculty staff or the university administrators?
I think it's a really complicated situation because clearly these universities have deemed that these encampments can't allow for campus to function properly. That's why at Columbia, they've moved all classes on Zoom, because basically it's either campus functioning properly or the encampment staying. And to me, that's a shame, because campus should be functioning properly and they shouldn't be allowing the encampment to get in the way of that. So in my mind, you have to enforce policy. You have to. If public safety isn't going to do it, or if they're not going to listen to the university, then it might have to go one step further and you get the law enforcement involved. Do I think that it should be violent? Of course not. Of course, nobody wants there to be violence. But at the end of the day, you have to enforce policy, because you have people here that are studying for exams, that are trying to go about their day, that are trying to be, proud of their Jewish identities and welcomed on campus, right? So you have to have some enforcement of policies in order to make sure that...
If students were to say that they were protesting peacefully, you are fine with university, being a space for activism as well?
I mean, the university has established guidelines for how activism is welcome at campus in certain places and at certain times. It's about time, place, and manner. At Columbia, it's all right during the week in specific places and with approval. You can't be there the entire time using megaphones and amplified sound at 2 a.m. while people are sleeping or studying. That is outside the bounds of what's okay on a university campus. And if that's a policy, which I think it should be, then that policy needs to be enforced.
Lishi, we're grateful that you've joined us. Thank you so much for your time. That's a student there, Lishi Baker, speaking to me from Columbia University. Now, as I mentioned in that interview, we heard from Marie Adele Grosso, one of the first students arrested at Columbia University. She explained to me why she was protesting. Have a listen.
What we set out to do was to bring awareness to the situation in Palestine, the situation in Gaza, and bring awareness to how we as Columbia students are complicit and our university is complicit and what needs to change. We created a peaceful protest that students were more inspired to join, more inspired to learn more, and it really did grow throughout the days that we were there and the days that have kept going. Columbia chose to respond to a peaceful protest with a very violent solution of calling the NYPD, and they showed that they were not going to listen to their students and that they were not going to care about Palestine and Gaza.
That was a Columbia University student, Marie Adele Grosso, speaking to me a few days ago. Now, history suggests that the student protest movement has good reason to think it can affect change. Here's why. Have a look. From New York to Texas to California, university campuses across the United States have been gripped by pro-Palestinian protests. And it's not just the United States. There have been smaller campus protests in Italy, France, even in Egypt. So are the protests likely to have any effect? American universities have a rich history of student protest, going back perhaps most famously to the Vietnam War. Demonstrations began in the 1960s, leading to this pivotal march past the Lincoln Memorial in October 1967. It was attended by up to 100,000 people. The war did end years later in 1975.
Black and white in almost equal numbers joined the march.
And take the anti-apartheid movement 50 years ago. Protests which began at universities led to more than 155 institutions divesting from South Africa by the late 80s. That was followed by economic sanctions, which put significant pressure on South Africa. Apartheid ultimately ended in the early 1990s. This time round, US universities say they have no intention of divesting from Israel. And so the free speech battle on America's campuses will likely continue until one side backs down. Well, with me here in the studio is Amna Ghaffar, a spokesperson for UCL Action for Palestine. Amna, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. And we're seeing emotions are so high across American campuses, universities. You heard there from a Jewish student who talked about how threatened he feels, and a anti-war student who was arrested just a few days ago. Just tell me, listening to both of them, you're a student here at UCL, what are your thoughts?
I think at moments like this, it's really important to assert that as a wider movement of global solidarity for the Palestinian people, we are motivated by a love of the Palestinian people and by a deep commitment to universal human rights. As well as that, it's important to mention that our movement is welcoming to all those who are committed to equality and anti-racist principles. And this includes any form of racism, obviously anti-Semitism, obviously Islamophobia. Huge numbers of Jewish people have joined this movement globally and locally with Jewish organisers as part of our group in UCL and part of all the movements, the student movements across the country.
So you've been working with Jewish movements because you had your own sit-in at UCL. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so very recently we held a 34-day long occupation of a very large lecture theatre in the heart of campus. And we've had open dialogues with all sorts of students. We have Jewish organisers in the group. The space was an open space for students of all demographics, and we were able to engage in those dialogues and achieve something, I think, really positive. And really
what did it achieve? I mean, did it help both sides sit down and try and understand the other side, essentially?
Well, I think the main two purposes of our student occupation was, one, to hold UCL to account for its complicity in Israel's genocide of Palestine, and two, it was to further educate students and individuals about the Palestinian cause for liberation and self-determination. So with that comes informing people about Palestinian culture and making more visible Palestinian voices, and as well as that, politicizing the student body. And I think we were successful in that, and I think we will continue to be successful in that the more and more actions we undertake.
How is UCL complicit when it comes to, the war in Gaza or Israel's military actions there?
So UCL has multiple research partnerships and collaborations with arms companies that are directly responsible for supplying the Israeli military. Most recently, UCL announced a collaboration with Tel Aviv University, which, like many other Israeli universities, has very close ties to the Israeli military. They've also assisted them in developing an ethical code which claims that operations resulting in 90% civilian casualties are legitimate and proportionate.
So you are calling for very similar things as American students are who are protesting on these campuses for divestment?
Yes, for divestment, for boycotts, for sanctions, and for cutting ties with arms companies and complicit academic institutions.
Do you see any kind of change or shift by the university?
I think as of right now, no. We are not. We are seeing more of a pushback from the management. We are seeing repression on campuses. We are seeing an increase in the securitization of political activism, especially pro-Palestinian, pro-Palestinian activism on campus. So,
do Jewish students, like the student I spoke to, Lishi, from Columbia, have they expressed that they feel threatened or intimidated by slogans like Intifada, for example?
In my experience and the experience of our group at UCL and our organising, no. But I think for us, always, and it's so important to reassert, the main purpose of our movement and our organisation is always going to be to centre the people of Palestine and their suffering at the hands of the Israeli occupation, colonisation and genocide.
When you see those sorts of images on American campuses, this is a philosophy lecturer, for example, being arrested and taken away. Why hasn't that sort of escalation gripped universities here in the UK, do you think?
I think, obviously, the genocide that is currently being live streamed is also being perpetrated by America's closest ally. So on top of that, we are seeing a collaboration between American academic institutions and American law enforcement. And I think the result of that is the police violence and this threat of, not even just threat of arrest, but arresting of students on campuses. Whereas in the UK, although there has been consistent escalation and political organisation from students, the universities are taking more a silencing approach. Repression is happening. The repression on campuses here and those in America are symptoms of the same issue, but manifesting in different forms.
And I have sort of 30 seconds, but Amna, what would you say to Jewish students who do feel afraid?
I would just say that as a movement, we are motivated by a love of Palestinian people and a commitment to end any system of racist domination that claims that some lives are worth less than others. And that includes anti-Semitism and that includes Islamophobia.
Amna Ghaffar, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now stay with us, because coming up, the case that started the Me Too movement overturned on appeal. We'll get the reaction of one woman who says she was abused by Harvey Weinstein. And I'll hear live from the man who's been on hunger strike for 2 weeks to save his island from tourism.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay. Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well? I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me!
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction was a landmark moment in the Me Too movement. But today, a New York court overturned his conviction, finding the disgraced movie producer did not receive a fair trial. Actress Ashley Judd described the ruling as an institutional betrayal. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
It was the downfall of one of Hollywood's most powerful men. The foundational case of the movement that became known as Me Too. Jail for one of the film world's most recognizable faces, closure for victims, secured with his conviction for felony sex crimes. It was a moment of relief for feeling that justice was possible. But his lawyers always said that they would appeal, and so they did, and they won.
The law was not applied fairly to Harvey Weinstein. And what the Court of Appeals, the highest court in the greatest state, in the greatest country, said today is that yes, no one is above the law, but no one is below the law either.
It is a stunning reversal by New York's highest appeals court, a 4-3 majority concluding that the judge in the case made crucial errors by allowing prosecution testimony from witnesses whose sexual allegations were not part of the case itself. The trial was not fair, they concluded. The most high profile of those who had come forward early on, actor Ashley Judd, she spoke now for so many women.
Today is a day like every day in American women's lives, when male sexual violence has intruded and disrupted our lives. I get the news from Jodi Kantor of the New York Times that 4 judges at New York's court have voted to overturn Harvey Weinstein's sexual crimes conviction. This is what it's like to be a woman in America, living with male entitlement to our bodies.
For so long in Hollywood circles, there had been suspicion about Weinstein. And with this case, women were emboldened to come forward, one after the other.
All right, hello, Melissa Thompson.
One alleged victim, Melissa Thompson, spoke exclusively to Sky News in 2018.
Okay, he's hugging me. What do I do now? I was sensing I have to be a little bit more vigilant of this situation than I originally thought.
So how's it flirt with you?
Harvey Weinstein has denied all non-consensual sexual contact. New York's District Attorney Alvin Bragg has said that he will pursue a retrial, but for now, Weinstein remains in prison for another California sex-related conviction.
Many people, many survivors, and those who love and support survivors probably thought that that original verdict meant that there was going to be a change. A lot of us felt that we were on a road to seeing a different America. And this moment makes it feel like we were wrong.
It was the conviction that galvanized the Me Too movement. But now it is the testimony of witnesses who said Me Too, which have unraveled a painful and pivotal case. Mark Stone, Sky News.
Well, let's bring in Sarah Ann Massey, an actor, writer and filmmaker. She accused Harvey Weinstein of misconduct, and now she runs a charity, Hire Survivors Hollywood, to support the careers of sexual abuse survivors in the industry. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to get your reaction to begin with to this conviction being overturned.
Personally, it was an incredibly painful piece of news, but as a survivor, as an advocate, it's frustrating because it's another example of how the criminal justice system is not set up to support survivors of sexual violence. And I just want to mention, it was a 3-4 decision, so it was obviously split. The decision does not mean he wasn't guilty, but they're focusing on this element of the law, which is a question mark for some people, witnesses, prior bad acts witnesses, which have happened in previous cases. So to see the system fail us again is not ultimately that surprising, but it is incredibly frustrating, and it is a huge step back with the progress that we've made over the past almost 7 years.
In our piece that we just did there, we heard from Tamara Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, which really came to life after the entire Harvey Weinstein revelations and case. And she talked about, there was a feeling from all of these women, survivors and women in all sorts of industries outside of Hollywood, that things would change and that this was somehow, certainly in America's case, America on a roll to bring about fundamental change. Where do you sit with all of this now?
Yeah, I think it is a sign that things are changing, but we have to remember there are always certain cases where rapists are convicted, and occasionally somebody is made an example of. Harvey had 30 years of abusing women. 115 people, I think, have officially come forward on the record. If he was not convicted, I think that would have been a huge miscarriage of justice. But the truth of the matter is that healing and justice do not only come through a day in court or making a police report. there are so many different avenues towards changing what is a systemic issue. It's a cultural, societal issue. We live in a rape culture. We live in a world that victim blames and is built on misogyny and the patriarchy. And so to undo that, it's more than just one case. It's more than just reforming the criminal justice system. We have to work at like 7 different levels to address this and keep the momentum moving forward to create actual tangible changes.
In fact, when you spoke up, you were essentially ostracized. You know, you're an actor, you weren't getting the auditions that you wanted. Your agent was telling you to stop speaking up about it. You kind of did the opposite. You set up a charity, Hire Survivors Hollywood, to basically call for fundamental change.
Yeah, I was really empowered by the fact that when I started speaking about the retaliation that I was facing, I heard from countless other people who were facing the same thing, either in the past when they were first abused, when they chose to speak up, when they told their agent or a producer about what was happening. And so I thought, I feel like there are simple solutions to this. I think there are ways to be inclusive of survivors in the process of hiring and also transforming what is often a sort of abusive work environment to be more safe and equitable for everybody. And what's been really great is like we have a free toolkit that anybody can use. We do consulting, we do trainings, and every single filmmaker we've worked with, every survivor who's been hired has had such a positive experience. And it allows for greater creativity. And what's nice is what we've learned in the entertainment industry is also applicable to other industries and other communities. So our organization is actually called Hire Survivors because our plan is to expand and help other communities to be inclusive of what is a historically marginalized group of people.
And yet there were some who had felt that the Me Too movement had gone too far. Your views on that?
Absolutely not. I'm glad you brought up Tarana Burke. Tarana Burke has been doing this work for well over a decade. And when we spoke out in 2017, it sort of highlighted the work that she's been doing with Me Too. This work will never be done because until society completely changes, almost every person you come across has had some sort of experience with sexual violence. And that implies that there are an awful lot of sexual abusers out there in the world. And it's not just about serving out justice through a court or through prison. It's about really changing the structure of society that allows for this. And, I'm also a writer, right? So when I write scripts, I'm making sure not to sort of cement those ideas, those little microaggressions that blame victims or make rape jokes. It's subtle things, but we can change things through the stories we tell, we can change things through legislation, and we can change things through collective action. My organization is nonprofit. You can make donations, you can hire us to consult. That's tangible support that goes directly to improving the lives of survivors. So it's great to listen, it's great to believe, it's great to talk about these things, but then action actually has to come out of that.
Indeed. Sarah, thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up.
The soldier was standing there and put an M16 in my head and said, "Now I will shoot you."
We hear allegations against Israel's controversial ultra-Orthodox Netza Yehuda battalion, which could soon be sanctioned by the United States. Welcome back. The US is expected to sanction an ultra-Orthodox Israeli military unit for alleged human rights abuses. It would be the first time the US government has targeted a specific IDF unit, and a move Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he'll fight with all of his might. Our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn has been hearing from the family of one man who died after being detained by its officers.
If the mansions of this West Bank village look surprisingly grand, that's because Gilia is where Palestinian Americans return to build their dream homes. Like Omar Assad, who came back after 45 years in America. His retirement here, though, was cut brutally short. Marawe Mahmoud was there the night Omar died.
They took us down from the car and pushed me by the head. The soldier was standing there and put an M16 in my head and said, "Now I will shoot you."
Omar was lying tied up next to him. When the soldiers had gone, he realized he was dead.
I took his jacket off. I checked, there is no pulse. I shouted, "Omar, Omar."
Palestinian doctors say Omar died in freezing temperatures of a stress-induced heart attack. An Israeli military report condemned the soldiers' moral failure and poor decision-making. The unit was the Netzach Yehuda Battalion, set up to help ultra-Orthodox Jews serve in the army. It mixes religion and soldiering. But it has become notorious, implicated in one case of alleged abuse of Palestinians after another, many of which its soldiers have filmed on their own phones. What happened to Omar Assad in this village is far from a one-off. The Netzach Yehuda Battalion is accused of numerous gross human rights violations across the West Bank, from unlawful killings of Palestinians, torture, sexual assault and electrocution of their victims. The US government's expected to cut assistance to the Netzach Yehuda Battalion, the first such move against any Israeli military unit. Israel says that's absurd. Its defense minister showing solidarity with the battalion soldiers this week.
No one in the world can lecture us on values or morals.
But one organisation of ex-soldiers opposed to the occupation says the Israeli government knows this could be just the beginning of action against its military.
They understand that this might open the Pandora's box of what the occupation really is and how it looks like to occupy millions with the military. And if that Pandora's box will be opened, and it is starting to open in recent months, I think they're terrified of the possible results.
In Gilia, Omar's widow welcomes reports America will act against the soldiers she believes killed her husband, but says she wants justice too.
God willing, it will be good if they do this, but also punish them like what they did with him, arrest them and fire them from work.
What happened in this small village has led to a potentially major moment in US-Israeli relations and a sign perhaps of what's to come. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Gilia.
Let's go to the United States now. Donald Trump returned to court for the third day of evidence in his hush money trial in New York. At the same time, the Supreme Court in Washington is hearing arguments over whether he should be immune from prosecution for acts carried out while he was president. Well, let's bring in our James Matthews, who joins us from the US Supreme Court. And James, I mean, this question around immunity, it's never really been sort of discussed before. So that in itself is quite extraordinary.
No, exactly, Yalda, and there may be far more discussion about immunity, and that may further delay the process of prosecution in this January the 6th case. That's what it's all about, the January the 6th case, election subversion and Donald Trump's alleged involvement in that. His lawyers went to the Supreme Court today to say, look, you cannot prosecute him on this because he was president. Therefore, he enjoys immunity for official acts during his presidency. The prosecution say, well, hang on a minute. When he was doing all this, he was acting as a private individual, a candidate seeking re-election. What we got from the Supreme Court judges, questions, discussion, from which we derive an inference as to what they might decide in a couple of months' time, potentially. It seems like they won't grant him full immunity, but it does seem like they have questions about immunity. They seem to lean towards that. The question will be, well, where is the immunity and what can be classed as official? If they're going to ask the trial court to establish that, that could mean yet further delay, possibly months, and certainly make things tight in terms of squeezing in this trial before the November election. Bearing in mind this is at the serious end of the criminal prosecutions that Donald Trump faces, then he would like that. He wants delay. He wants to get past the election. And of course, elsewhere, he was in a New York court, the criminal hush money trial. A third court event happened when a judge in New York upheld a defamation ruling against E. Jean Carroll, the writer. So a legal hat trick in one day for Donald Trump, not necessarily the hat trick he wanted to score.
No, it's not. James, thank you very much. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Coming up next, what would you do to stop your home being overrun by tourists? We speak to a man who's on day 15 of a hunger strike.
On Sky News at 10, an apology from a central character in the post office scandal. Scotland's First Minister abandons coalition, leaving him facing a no-confidence vote. And the Prince of Wales' surprise visit, where he reveals his favourite joke. Do join me at 10.
What we have developed is actually a portable cooling device, which you then attach a silicone head cap, who is intended to be used in the acute phase of injury to treat concussions. In fact, sports-related concussions are in fact unique because athletes has this elevated brain temperature in general when doing sports. And it's well known to when you have that, that's negative and it increases the risk of a worsened outcome when suffering a concussion. So what Polar Cap then aims to do is to reduce that exercise-induced elevated brain temperature in the acute phase of injury. I was fortunate to play professional ice hockey for 17 years in Sweden. And with that comes injuries such as concussions. And me, myself, suffered maybe 5 during my career. And it was actually a concussion that ended my career. So that in combination with my academic background being an engineer, I decided to see can potentially concussions be treated in the acute phase? And can you then lower the risks of these long-term consequences that unfortunately many athletes suffers? And that was the main reason for me joining. And I'm very happy now to see that after many years of clinical evidence gathering, we now see that actually you can lower that risk. Our goal is that this could be used and should be used by all sports that has a risk of suffering concussions or having concussions. And we're thrilled now that we have a collaboration with the United Rugby Championship, for instance, and we have a lot of rugby clubs also in Europe. And yes, I would say that why not take the chance of lowering the risk of long-term problems when suffering a concussion, regardless of which sport or wherever you get it. It's well known that being warmer when suffering a concussion increases the risk of a worsened outcome. So in that case, it's been quite obvious that it would most likely be beneficial to cool. And that was like the foundation when this was initiated in 2015, 2016.
Now, It's the island of sun, sea and sand. People on Tenerife, though, have been rallying against mass tourism. They say it's having a catastrophic impact both to the environment and to housing prices. Have a look.
I don't think it's just mass tourism. There should be a limit to the growth of tourism. The problem we have is that the number of residents has grown exponentially in the last 20 years, and I think that's one of the roots of the problem. There are a lot of problems, but I think that, yeah, we need a law on residency so that the Canary Islands or the quality of life here is not compromised.
Already, the island is oversaturated with buildings, and what's more, there are buildings that are completely destroying other houses for no reason, even for tourism. And what we are doing is profiting more from the land and leaving nature completely unprotected.
So a snapshot of the situation there in Tenerife, for one group, has even gone on hunger strike. Yalda Hakim is on day 15 without food and joins me now live from Tenerife. Thank you so much, Yalda, for joining us here on the programme. Just tell us a little bit more about this hunger strike. You're about 2 weeks in.
Yes, thanks to you. So we have like a long term to contribute to an economy that really focuses on meeting the needs of all people living here, and also sustaining the ecological basis of our territory. Because right now our economy is just focused on accumulating wealth and power for a few people, and we're just getting tired of it. So in the case of Canary Islands, our main form of economy is based on tourism. So this is why the mainstream media is focusing on tourism and even telling we are against tourists or tourism. And that's not true. We are just want economy that give us future, and a political system that focuses on democracy.
Yalda, do you want fewer tourists to come to Tenerife?
I would like people to contribute in the best way possible to sustain life and to have a better democracy in any territory. So if tourists contribute to the well-being of the people living here and the stabilization of the ecosystems that support us here, of course I'm completely okay with tourism, but we need to be aware that any territory, not just Canary Islands, have a limit. If you point out the Canary Islands in a map, it's a really small territory, and we receive like 16 million people each year, and around that number. And it's I would say really excessive, because not because I say so or because I don't like tourists. I do like them, but I also like to have a future and to have a sustainable life and a sustainable society that cares for all people living here.
Okay.
So that's why we're protesting.
Why you're protesting. Yalda Hakim, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Yeah. And Yalda, as we said, has gone without food and has been on that hunger strike for about 15 days. Well, that's it for this week's programme. Will the students' protests continue? Will universities back down? We'll be staying on top of that story and bringing you up to date. Good night for now.